Hello and welcome to the show. Now, I will be honest, I have absolutely no idea how a CVT gearbox works, other than the fact that it somehow does. Magic happens and the car manages to keep accelerating at all times. It's one of those things that's a slightly surreal experience. I imagine an even more surreal experience driving it in real life, certainly compared to messing about with it in a game, for example. I like the Regera, don't get me wrong, it's a ridiculously fast vehicle. However, I can't help but feel it would be more fun, perhaps, with a normal gearbox. Either way, the CVT in it works very, very well. The car is unbelievably fast. Not the easiest vehicle to drive, no, but it is an unbelievably quick vehicle. But very, very strange. But what if we were to go racing with normal cars, with normal gearboxes? However, we were only allowed to use one gear. We would have to choose or build our cars to specifically work in a single gear. You see, a CVT is very clever in that it keeps all of the power available at all times, again, somehow, with magic. But in a normal car, gearboxes don't quite work like that. If you are in too higher a gear, you'll have very little power. You'll struggle to get out of a corner, but you're in a lower gear, and you'll run out of speed down the straights. You'll be buzzing into the rev limiter. So it makes choosing a car, building a car, and choosing how to work the gearing quite interesting. We were going to go to A-Class for our vehicles, and my plan was torque. The Buick GSX here has a huge amount of torque. In A-Class, this has got almost 700 torque. And I figured I could get away with running a higher gear. I say a higher gear. In fact, I was running second, but I tuned the gearbox in this car to have a very, very long second gear and go up to 170 miles an hour, which is a lot of speed. Of course, the downside is out of slow corners, well, the gearing is very long. My hope was that the torque would be enough to pull it out of the corners. However, it's not just all about gearing. You see, we still got to get around a circuit. We've still got to get around corners. Cars like this Buick, for example, to get as much power in the Buick as I do have, compromises have to be made elsewhere. It's still got to stay at A-Class. So while I do have it on race tyres, it's still a relatively heavy car. Which means cornering ability was perhaps going to be a questionable area. My plan, my hope, was that the torque would be enough to see it through. I'd hoped that with the massive amount of torque getting out of the slower corners, it might do the trick in, be able to accelerate away in a manner that other cars weren't quite capable of. So, it was off to the circuit. Now, the way that this race would work, once you could set off from the grid as normal, as you would in first gear. Once you got to your selected gear, that's where you had to stay. So once I got into second, I couldn't then change down gears. If other drivers were using third or fourth, you could pull away in first and go through second, third, and but once you hit that gear, that is where you stopped. As you can see, coming out of the first chicane here, there's a lot of cars very much struggling to get going. Monza is a very nasty circuit, and the specific reason why I came here, because you have some very long straights. And then you also have some nasty chicanes where you're then going to have to be pulling away from a low speed. The Mercedes that we are following here had to dive up the inside into the first of the chicanes. The RX-7 takes a little bit of a interesting line. Either way, he screws himself over because he now can't get any power down out the other side. And the Mercedes will have... The Mazda loses almost 3 places. And Lotus is going around the outside. There's a King Cobra trying to get involved in all of that. As far as circuits go for trying to select gears and whatnot, yeah, this is a tough one, because the time that you'll make up, down the straights, you'll lose potentially in the chicanes. But 2 shorter gears, and you'll be buzzing in the limiter for so long down the straights, you won't stand a chance. You can see Mercedes is out of gears. In fact, both the Mercedes, the classic Mercedes and the modern Mercedes, out of gears down this back straight. The Durango, and unfortunately my Buick, would be off in visiting the gravel trap. A little bit better for the Durango. I had problems with my car in terms of handling, I'll say that much. Mercedes continuing to be in this mid-pack. The Cobras, a little bit out of gears. Nobody's going anywhere. The Mazda's actually got the best top end here as he squeezes his way through the middle of that group of cars into the Parabolica. They go 3 wide through here. Yeah, the RX-7 has the best top speed out of this lot, but because of that much higher gearing, it's struggling a little bit to get out of these corners. although once they do get onto another straight, again, they're looking at going 3 wide. The RX-7 will have that little bit extra speed by the time they get to the end of the straight, as the Cobra and Mercedes, they just can't do anything. They're both stuck in the limiter at a very, very similar amount of speed. The Exige is not that far behind. The Mustang, very, very quick down the straight. And the Silvia, a little bit out of control in the braking zone. While the Silvia is explored twice on the opening lap, don't forget about that car. Don't forget about that car just yet. A rather bizarre battle was forming. Dodge Durango versus Lotus Exige? I mean, we've seen some unusual rivalries over the years with FailRace. This one is right up there. This is right up there indeed. The Exige was actually doing a pretty good job in terms of a top-end speed, but to do that, of course, is running a high gear, and the Exige doesn't have huge amounts of power like some of the other vehicles that we have here. The Durango, for example, will have massive power, massive torque figures going on in that car. It is heavy, you know, don't forget, there's still a lot of dodge to be moving around, but that power, that torque is going to come in handy. The Exige, still a track car when it comes to the corners, despite a little bit of a mistake out on the gravel, would then be able to fight back. And the Lotus's top end was, yeah, not too bad. As you can see, it's actually pulling away a little bit from the Durango. There is behind them, though, that Silvia. That's running 800 horsepower in A-Class. As you can imagine, it is very, very difficult to drive through the corners, hence a little bit of exploring. But with so much power in such a light car, and I think they were about 4th gear, the thing was topping out way quicker than anything else here, and it had so much power it could get out of the chicanes, and it's gone. It just flies past everything, although it has to be very careful into the parabolica here, as it doesn't handle the corners whatsoever, but everything else is struggling so much to get out of the corners that the time lost through the turns for the Silvia isn't that bad, and now we're on to another straight. And the Nissan is just gone. It is unbelievably fast as it soars past the Exige and goes running off down the order. Now, the front 2 cars in this race, I am going to have to disqualify. Now, I don't know whether they were changing gears or not. The telemetry shows them as. Now, we have had problems in the past with this game doing strange things. The effective leaders would therefore be the Jag versus King Cobra that was going on here. So yeah, I don't know if the replays, the telemetry is consistent with everybody else except for a Monaro and a Corvette that's running around at the front of this particular race. So I don't quite know, but I am having to, yeah, slight disqualifications for them. The King Cobra was mighty fast, though. It didn't have a massively high top speed down here. It was okay. It was comparable, well, the Mercedes we saw running earlier, but it was doing very, very well at getting out of the corners. It was able to accelerate away and still be vaguely competitive down the straights, that it could work its way past the Jag. A big battle that raged on throughout large parts of the race. Mercedes versus the RX-7. While the Shelby would get past and vanish off down the road, these two would remain close. The Mercedes had the power and the torque in a better place out of the corners. The RX-7 had a better top-end speed. The Silvia breezed past both of these, absolutely no problem. This is just so fast around here. The Mercedes would, be stuck in the limiter about halfway down the straights, whereas the RX-7 wouldn't be. The Mazda would be fine. However, coming out of the corners like this first chicane, for example, the Mazda's got absolutely no go. It's just stuck. It can't go particularly fast whatsoever, and it has to work for the rest of the lap. You can see the gap that the Mercedes can pull just on that one exit zone is pretty damn impressive. The Silvia, well, that continued picking off just about everything around here. The Shelby didn't stand a chance. It's off towards the effective 3rd place. That's a classic Mercedes Grand Prix car. Silvia, an utter handful through the corners, as you can imagine, trying to slow that thing down. As I said, this is being run in, I think, about 4th gear, and it still spins the wheels like a lunatic out of these corners. That's how much power there is in the car, and probably not very good tyres. The Shelby was quick through the chicane, but then can't get anywhere near in terms of straight line speed. The Silvia has to be very, very careful into the parabolica. The Mercedes knows they've got to be brave if they want to try and make up any sort of lap speed on that car. And in the end, well, can carry good speed around the outside and keeps himself ahead, but it's nowhere near enough. It is nowhere near enough to fend off the Nissan as, well, by the time they get to start-finish line, the Nissan is Yeah, gone. Just gone. The gap that it could pull was just outstanding. Now, I did not have a particularly great race here at Monza. While my car should theoretically have been okay here, I made a couple of mistakes early on that dropped me back, and the bigger issue was my handling. The Buick was just not particularly nice through the corners. I did start catching up some of the slower cars. The Focus was not having a good time around this circuit. It was really struggling to get out of the corners. It was okay in terms of top speed, and it was okay through the corners in terms of actual grip, but it just couldn't get itself out of the corners very well. I was pulling huge gaps on it when it came to these slower sections. Again, the Focus will catch up to me around here. The Buick wasn't a great handling car. I'm going to be honest. Also a little bit of off-roading from me. Yeah, the Focus much quicker through the corners. However, the initial pull away, even despite my very, very long gearing, that part was kind of working in the Buick. So our victor in all of this would be the King Cobra Mustang. This thing was doing some seriously quick. It was far quicker than the rest of us. We couldn't match the King Cobra for its pace. Now, as I said, I don't know quite what was going on with the Corvette and the Monaro. If they were indeed changing gears as the telemetry would suggest, the fact that the King Cobra got so close to a Corvette says just how fast this car was around here, despite being stuck in one gear. You will hear it buzzing the limiter fairly regularly, but still, that's a mighty, mighty fine. Mighty fine ever. If the top two weren't, then it would be a Monaro that would win by an utter mile out here, but yeah, going from what the telemetry suggests, that's not quite the case. Second place would go to a Jag, and actually a fairly convincing second place as well. You can see the size of the gaps going on here. It's, yeah, was a fair way clear of the rest of the field. Now, third looked like it was going the way of the Silvia, and truth be told, had the Silvia not had a lot of offs early on, that would probably win here. However, Silvia, again, continued to be very difficult to get slowed down, and on the final lap, Silvia went for a trip across the gravel at Ascari and would drop down to 5th, meaning it was left to the classic Mercedes Grand Prix car going up against the Shelby GT500. Shelby, as you can imagine, pretty good choice, many powers in that car, and with slightly longer gearing, it would be the Ford that was able to get past. The Mercedes was good out of the corners, but ran out of gears. The Mercedes was pretty decent out of the slower speed sections, but just couldn't get past whatever speed it was, should sit and buzz the limiter, and the Shelby was able to get the move done. The Mercedes was a little bit wide at Parabolica as well, so it would be the Shelby that would go on to take a third place. Had been an interesting tactical battle, and things were about to get even tougher for our cars. Race 2 would head to Lime Rock. Now, you're not going to necessarily be wanting ridiculously long gears around here, but you have got to bear in mind that it is a fast circuit still. You know, there is a decent start-finish straight, and while, yeah, it's a short lap, it's not the slowest of laps, so you've got to be very careful with choosing your gears. That is, if you had multiple gears to choose from. If, like my Buick, it was built for a single gear, I knew the Buick wasn't going to be a particular fan of Lime Rock. I knew it was probably going to struggle. My hopes for the torque being enough were, yeah, looking a little bit on the light side. But, nevertheless, I was going to give it as good a go as I could. Plenty of vehicles fighting too wide on this opening lap. Actually, fighting too wide was a real problem with cars, because once you start going side by side, you were both slower through a corner, and then you were even worse in terms of your respective gears. Now we find out who's struggling with their gearing. The Jag, that was way too short in terms of the gear ratio. The RX-7 was buzzing the limiter quite early down the straight as well. There were some cars that were limited, I think about 112 miles an hour was what we were seeing from a couple of guys who had got too short gears. They'd gone for third gear and were just running out of, I think mostly third gear, was causing trouble for some of the cars, just running out of steam halfway down the straight and then being passed. Now, the RX-7, as you can see, once it's got off that straight, is now very quick out of the corners. The Durango, not quite such a fan of these slower speed corners. You've really got to try and keep your momentum up through the turns to try and keep yourself in a good position with your gearbox if you happen to be in a car that needed it. A car, for example, like mine. Now, it hadn't been particularly kind to me in terms of grid spots as well, which wasn't helping massively, but I had found some cars to race with, at least. The Silvia, well, that didn't really work here. It was very quick. I mean, we both moved across, mostly for me to defend for the Mercedes, but also a little bit we saw the Silvia coming and figured we'd get out of the way of the Nissan missile back there. The Silvia didn't work here. It was too fast and way too uncontrollable for a track like Lime Rock. We didn't have a rule whatever car you ran in the first race, you had to run in the second race, so you didn't have specifically built cars for the sorts of circuits. Yeah, my Buick was good enough out of the corners that I could cause real trouble for the Mercedes. Because the Mercedes was slightly high, I say slightly higher geared than mine, perhaps more power, or not more power, sorry, less power, less torque, whatever, I could get out of the corners initially a little bit better than the Mercedes, and it made life very, very difficult. At the front, it was a Lotus that was leading the way. The Exige was trying to fend off from the King Cobra. Once more, that Mustang was doing some serious fast lap times, and it was the Mustang's ability to get out of the corners that was working so well for the car. Now, the Exige is going to be the better of the two when it comes to the turns. There is no doubt about that. It's going to have a better chassis and so on. But the Mustang was able to use its power. And again, the Mustang was running out of gears down the straight. The Exige was quicker than the Ford by the time they got down towards turn 1, but it was only slightly. The Mustang perfectly happy with its gear ratios around here. Yeah, it buzzed the limiter a little bit, but it could get out of the corner again. You could see it could just pull that little gap on the Lotus every time they come out of a corner. Every acceleration zone, as we get to these slow corners, the Lotus just can't get going again. The Lotus just can't get it out of that turn, and off vanishes the King Cobra. Strange to be saying that about King Cobra, I will be honest. However, yeah, King Cobra was mighty good at this sort of event. The Durango, this time not fighting with an Exige, instead fighting with an RX-7. Again, it would be another race-long battle for the RX-7. The Mazda, good out of the corners with those lower gear ratios, but just kept getting stuck in the limiter. In fact, you could hear it from the replay camera. It was pretty much buzzing the limiter as it left the final corner, whereas the Ford was buzzing the limiter by the time it got maybe by the start-finish straight. Yeah, the Mazda was in a little bit of trouble, but then would then close up all the way through these tight, twisty sections. The Focus was also another car going very, very quickly. Started right down at the very back of the grid as well. That Focus was working absolute wonders here, even with a little bit of a slight off around those first couple of corners. Yeah, the Focus, while it had struggled massively at Monza around here, it was working. It had got the grip through the corners, perhaps a little bit of a lower gear around here was helping it to get out of the turns, and yeah, that was fast. I, at some point, made a little mistake coming over the crest of the hill, had allowed the Mercedes to get past, and I knew the Mercedes was quicker than me. I knew that Mercedes was a bit faster around this circuit. The only chance I had was to, well, get back past immediately. Now, under braking, my Buick wasn't terrible. I thought we'd have a go up into turn 1, and sure enough, I get the car stopped. Now, I'm going to run a bit wide. The Mercedes will go for a cutback. However, I knew the weakness of the big Merc. It just struggled out of these slower turns, and as long as I could keep my nose alongside for the next part, I could get the Buick back past and then continue to use my low-speed acceleration to my advantage, and I would be past once more. However, it was all-out defense from there on in. I knew I couldn't really fight too much with the Mercedes, and we were really slowing each other down because going too wide was not helping our cars. However, I had that little bit more low-end grunts than the big Merc, so I could continue to fend it off. It was a fun battle. It was a fun battle. It didn't really help us with positions, and it was for about 12th or something, but there we go. It was working. It was working indeed. The GP cars, as you might imagine, weren't quite so good around here. Again, they're kind of general lack of grip, perhaps not helping at the twistier Lime Rock circuit. The Alpha, quite the handful. As you could imagine, they're not easy cars to drive normally, let alone when we're doing strange things with them here. However, the Alpha did have some half-decent straight line speed as they headed down the start-finish straight. The P3 wasn't going to make it easy for that Mercedes, as the Mercedes having to go a very long way around. Look at the camber we've got going on with those front wheels. Oh, I do like these ludicrous old machinery. While yeah, the P3 had got that straight line speed, was able to fire back into turn 1. It's gearing a bit long for this circuit. The Mercedes can hound it, and it's coming out of these slower corners where the P3 just couldn't get going. The P3 really, really struggled to get going. In fact, if I hadn't been fighting with the Mercedes, I might have been able to go and chase down that P3. Good straight line speed, but yeah, not enough grunt out of the corners as they're both sideways up over the hill. At the front, it would be victory for the King Cobra. There wasn't actually anything even ahead of it on the road. The Monaro was down in second. Again, telemetry shows the same Monaro and Corvette changing gears, so they'll have to be disqualified, unfortunately. Either way, again, that's a very impressive win for the King Cobra, if it is the case that the Monaro was shifting from time to time, because that's a yeah, that's a hell of a feat. A hell of a feat. Perhaps only one car was really matching the Cobra in terms of speed, and that would be the Focus. Now, the Focus ran out of laps to do anything about the cars further up. It did chase down the Exige, and on the final lap, the Ford was closing quite quickly as they head up towards the final corner. For the Exige, however, it was going to be just enough to take that second place, with the Ford coming home in third. On the cooldown lap, they were very, very close indeed. In fact, if the race had been one lap longer, the Focus would probably have got the Lotus. Then the Ford was mighty impressive as well around here. So, yeah, it turns out Ford quite good when it comes to the to the single gear race. As yeah, we got the cooldown lap, and now they're going to go side by side through. I mean, we say it's a cooldown lap. It's basically so the replays don't screw up. Everybody still treats it like a race, but you know. Either way, yeah, single gear racing, a really interesting tactical battle. It is often more tactical than it is out and out racing, although being able to get past cars quickly is very important. As we saw at Lime Rock, my fight with the Mercedes, once you start going side by side, once you start losing little bits of momentum through corners, it makes everything 10 times worse. It really does kind of snowball, so you need to be able to get overtakes done quickly. Car handling is still a big factor in this. I focused too much on the engine. I focused too much on getting the car out of the corners. I didn't really think too much about the whole handling side of things, and I paid the price. The Buick just wasn't good enough through the corners. It was, yeah, okay pulling away. My whole plan of big power, big torque, and have a very long gear wasn't terrible. However, the stakes at Monza put me too far back to do anything. At Lime Rock, I was stuck in battles. My Buick wasn't the best car here, that much is for sure. The King Cobra was the way to go. High power, high torque is definitely helpful, no doubt about it. However, grip is still very, very useful. The likes of the Exige, the likes of the Focus, certainly when it came to Lime Rock, were working wonders. Massive power in the Silvia was entertaining at Monza, that much is for sure, but you've still got to be able to keep the damn car under control when it's a complete rocket ship coming to any sort of braking zone. Yeah, it's very interesting tactical battle, very different to other sort of racing that you will do, and deciding how best to approach the car build is a very interesting prospect. I recommend you give it a go. I recommend you give it a try, because yeah, there's a lot of different factors to take into consideration when building these. I like the tactical battles. I like the tactical battles going on with this. I just got it wrong. I had a go, but didn't quite work in the Buick. That, though, is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.